I'm Manny Duke, and in this lesson, we're going to discuss what is sometimes known as the nuclear bomb of no limit hold'em, moving all in before the flop. Look, no matter how much we try to avoid it, there just comes a time in almost every tournament where we find ourselves sitting on a short or a shortish stack. While this is not a desirable spot to be in some ways it does simplify our decision-making process because we're down to kind of an all or nothing situation. Either we're going to fold our hand pre-flop or we're going to push all in the hopes of doubling up. There's just really no in between. Why would we ever consider moving all in pre-flop and risking all of our chips? Well, there are really two good reasons for this. First, by moving all in, we place all of the pressure in the hand onto our opponents who must decide if they are willing to risk a significant portion of their stacks to call our bet. Because it's such a significant portion of their stacks, we're putting so much pressure on them, they're very likely to fold. That's very desirable to us because just the blinds and antes sitting out on the table will represent an increase to our stack of usually about 25 to 30%, something we really want when we're short stacked. Second, moving all in saves us from having to make a tough decision after the flop, especially when we're in a hand against a strong post-flop player. For example, let's say the blinds are 2 and 400, and we have just 10 big blinds. We have 4,000 in our stack. And we're in middle position, and we find ourselves with ace-king. If we make a standard 3x raise and get called by a player on the button who has 30 big blinds in his stack, what happens when we see a flop of 7 of diamonds, 4 of clubs, 9 of diamonds? I mean, all we have is 2 overcards to the board. What does our opponent have? Did he hit? Does he have a pair? A flush draw? With over 8 big blinds in the pot and just 7 big blinds left in our stack, what are we supposed to do? Do we bet our hand? What do we do if he calls? Are we supposed to check and see if our opponent bets so that he can put the pressure on us? I mean, if he does move in, are we supposed to call with just ace high? Are we supposed to fold? What do we do? I mean, it's just a tough spot, and one that we could have avoided by playing the hand differently. Let's look at the same situation, but this time, instead of raising 3x pre-flop, we just move all in. I mean, the first thing we notice that instead of risking just 10% of his stack to call our hand, we're now asking our opponent to risk fully 1/3 of his stack to stay in the hand. And that's a huge difference. We can really do a lot of damage to his stack. The second thing we notice is that we no longer really have to worry about making a difficult post-flop decision because all of our money is already in the middle. So the hand's just going to play to showdown and we're going to get to see 5 cards. So how do you decide on when to move all in before the flop? Well, as we've already pointed out, the most important factor in making this decision is really the size of your chip stack in relation to the size of the blinds. If you have a stack that's only about 10 big blinds, you're looking to move in really in the early and middle positions with any pair and nearly any decent face card that has something with it, like, King Jack, King 10, Queen Jack, Queen 10, those kinds of hands. Now, if you are in the late positions, like on the button, and everybody happens to fold around to you on the button and you've got like 10 to 12 big blinds, you could actually consider moving in without looking at your cards because the probability that the small blind and big blind are going to fold is so high that you're almost always just going to get those blinds and antes into your stack. And you know what? If you do get called, you can still win. I mean, any 2 cards can win, right? Likewise, if everybody moves around to your small blind and they've all folded, you could also move in the small blind really without looking at your cards when you're in that serious danger zone of like 10 big blinds. Now, when you get into the 15 to 20 big blind range, you can be a little choosier about your hand selection because you still have time to wait, but you don't want to be too much choosier. I mean, I wouldn't recommend ever moving in without looking at your cards when you have as much as 15 to 20 big blinds. You're not that desperate yet. Ideally, you always want to be the first player to act when you do decide to move all in, as it's always better to bet all in than it is to call all in for your tournament life, because your opponents can fold when you're betting and you can pick up all those blinds and antes. When you're calling, you just have to win the hand. Now, of course, when you have a really good hand that you actually believe to be better than the hand that your opponent has moved all in with, like, you have aces or kings or ace king or queens or even a hand like jacks, then calling all in is certainly acceptable. Another key to moving all in pre-flop is timing. If you have a premium hand, you're going to move in no matter what. But if you're holding something more speculative like King Jack, you would ideally like to make this play against opponents who are likely to fold to your raise. If your stack isn't very short, your 15 to 20 big blinds isn't so short, but if you're above 20 blinds in the 20 to 25 big blind range, then you can really use the all-in play as an effective way to reshove or re-raise an opponent where you can put a lot of pressure on an opponent. Let's say again that the blinds are still that 200 and 400, and let's say you have like 20 big blinds in your stack. An opponent with 35 big blinds now makes a standard 3x raise from middle position, and you look down to find a hand like ace of clubs, jack of clubs on the button, a hand that normally you might consider just calling with. Well, this is a good hand, but certainly there are plenty of hands that beat it, which makes calling that much of your stack when you're already a little bit short maybe a poor option. Instead, this is a spot where you really consider re-raising, pushing all in against your opponent to push out the players with the weaker hands than yours and to apply the maximum amount of pressure to the original raiser. Without a premium hand of his own, your re-raise doesn't give him the right odds to call because he has to call 17x more, which is most of his stack. That means that not only can you steal the valuable blinds and the valuable antes in the pot, but you also get to steal his original raise. And that gives you a lot of time to wait for a good thing to happen to you so you can really increase your stack later.